In this session we're going to look at Porter's 5 forces. We've already produced a series of classes on each of the forces, and in this particular one we're going to look at competitive rivalry. This is really economics, but since we'll be dealing with economics with separate sessions, and just to give it a different slant, I'm going to try and deal with competitive rivalry without the terminology of economics. So we're just going to sidestep economics. In fact, when you do economics, you'll realize I haven't sidestepped it at all. I'm just using different words. But nonetheless, let's go through it in a non-economic terminological way. So let's sidestep it that way. Competitive rivalry between existing players is where we start. I say players. Players means companies, existing companies, or existing participants in the market. And we start with the idea that competitive rivals are organizations with similar products and services aimed at the same group of consumers. It's a pretty good definition, really, of what happens in economics. If we can go back there for a second, it's this idea that competition exists when companies have similar products, so they're trying to dispose of the similar products or services, and they're really aimed at the same market. So the competition exists between the firms to try and produce, market, sell, generate profits from the same set of, or a similar set of products aimed at the same set of consumers. So hence the competitive element. The reason why they do this is, of course, because they want greater market share. The companies are in business to make a profit. They're in business to survive. They're in business to generate surpluses that they can reinvest and grow the business. So they want to try and meet their corporate objectives. And to do this, they have to beat their competitors. High competitive pressure results in lower prices. The more competitors selling in the market, the lower the price. So the consumer benefits, but the companies have to suffer lower prices. And that means they suffer lower profit margins and lower profitability overall. As consumers, we like this. We like the idea of having cheap products, cheap goods. But of course the companies who have suffered as a consequence may not now be able to invest in the business, and of course long run employment within that sector may fall. Rivalry occurs because one or more of the competitors either feels the pressure or sees the opportunity to improve its position. That is a good statement of entrepreneurship. It's the entrepreneur, the business person, sees an opportunity and thereby tries to meet that opportunity, try to fulfill the opportunity by taking on directly the competitors and producing different products. One way of competing is to excuse me, by lowering or by raising the price to gain a temporary advantage. That's under the control of the business. The business may determine what the price is. But constant lowering and raising of prices may be counterproductive, as we'll see later on. I'll mention this in a later slide. Another way of competing is by using the distribution channels more effectively. For example, perhaps selling in DIY stores if it's a household product, or it could sell in a supermarket, or it could sell even online. So creative use of distribution channels is another way of competing. Of course, the excuse me, the company could improve the quality of the good, make it more contemporary, make it more attractive in the marketplace, change the design, change the texture, change the functionality of the product. And perhaps by changing the quality and changing the perception of the quality of the product, greater branding will occur as a consequence, and the product will be differentiated, at least in the mind of the consumer. And that's another way of competing. Excuse me. Price changes. Well, when we think of price changes, we have to think of elasticity of demand. Elasticity of demand is a separate topic in economics and we dealt with separately. But for the moment, it's simply the responsiveness of demand to a change in price. That's all elasticity is. So if the price goes up, by what percentage will the demand fall as a consequence? So elasticity of demand considerations are very, very important. It's not just a question of varying the price and keeping your fingers crossed. You've got to have some idea about how consumers are going to react to the price change. Constant price changing may alienate the consumer. Consumers have built up knowledge of the market through experience by shopping. And through shopping, they have built up pictures of what products and what the prices of those products. They've got these pictures in their mind when they set out to shop. And if every time you go shopping the prices have changed, you are wrecking, or the company is wrecking, that knowledge. And that can be disorientating. It can be, people have to shop around again, and even though they're going to buy the product and they've settled on the product, they got it in their basket, in their minds they're probably thinking, I wonder what is the price down the road. So am I being shortchanged, or am I being cheated in some way? So the market is being destroyed, or is being disrupted by frequent price changes. So if the price is changing every day or every week, it might backfire on the producer. There's also, of course, an administration cost. The company has to change its database, all its prices. Imagine in a supermarket having to change all the prices. That's a big job, and it's very expensive. So price changing is not that easy. There's also the possibility of getting advantage over rivals through what we call vertical integration. Vertical integration means the company starts to sell directly to the consumer. It moves closer to the consumer. But it could also move backwards and control raw materials, or control production, or buy one of the component producers further back in the chain. And if it were to do that, then the competitors have got a problem. So if one company suddenly vertically integrates, let's say it's got the resources to do it, it could start selling directly to customers, or it could start to control the raw materials or the production or some component that's essential for the product or whatever it is. If it were to do that, then the rivals may have a big problem on their hands. Another way in which competition can happen is by product differentiation. An organization differentiates itself from its competitors, and what it's doing really is trying to find something unique that the buyers want. Differentiation leads to branding. It leads to identification of the product with the company. It's not generic, it's not common. This also means, of course, that differentiation is of two types. There's a psychological differentiation. It may be through repetitive advertising that people come to believe that a certain product is better than its competitors. Petrol, for example, is petrol. Unleaded petrol, I guess for technical reasons, it must be more or less the same. It's homogeneous. But one retailer would like you to believe that their petrol is perhaps better than the next. And they do this by producing advertisements which suggest that their petrol is is good. It's excellent. You should only buy their petrol. Low levels of product differentiation leads to intense rivalry. If the products are almost the same, almost identical, then it doesn't matter to the consumer which one you buy. The only determining factor in that case will be the price. So low levels of differentiation leads to very high levels of competition. There's also a problem with exit barriers. Companies can get locked in to production. Perhaps a company has invested a lot in the premises and in very costly machines. And if the market now turns against the company can't get out. Well, it can't get out easily. Nobody wants to buy the specialist machines off them. There may be no second-hand market for those machines. So high exit barriers means that a company may have to continue even though it's not covering all of its costs. But providing it's covering its variable cost, the cost of producing each item, then it's worth continuing. But it may not be covering what's known as the fixed cost, the cost of the capital and all of the sunk cost, all of the costs that are fixed in the buildings and in the premises and in the machines, in the offices and so on. But providing that each item, the cost of each item has been covered, it may continue to produce. So rivalry is influenced by a number of factors. Here's a list of possible influences on rivalry. I will have a few words about each one of these in turn. Let's start with the large number of organizations. A large number of organizations competing in a market will lead to each individual organization or each individual company struggling for market share. If there are only two companies in the market, and if it was equally distributed, we have 50% each. It's very unlikely it would be equally distributed, but let's just pretend. But if there was 100 companies in the market producing very similar goods, then perhaps the company could expect on average 1% of the market share. That's a lot different. So the number of organizations, the number of firms or companies in the market really determines the degree of competition. The next one is slow market growth. The problem is that organizations have to fight for market share. If the market's growing very slowly and the companies want to grow and meet their corporate objectives and generate profits and invest and all this sort of thing, invest in new products and research and development and so on and so on. If they want to do that, the only way to do it is really to try and kill off the competitor by out-competing the competitor. So in slow market growth situations, companies become very competitive and try to become innovative in their competition to try and outmaneuver the competitors. High fixed costs. Well, if there are high fixed costs, then perhaps the companies will have to produce in volume to try and meet those high fixed costs, to try and cover the high fixed costs. They have to produce in large volume sales. But if all of the companies in the industry produce high volume sales, perhaps the market is not there to absorb that. So again, high fixed costs can lead to rivalry, intense rivalry, but it can also lead to a great deal of frustration if the market is not expanding to meet that. High storage costs. Goods must be sold as soon as possible because they might be expensive to store. Depends on the nature of the product. Obviously, if it's food stuff, it has to be sold very quickly. So if it's perishable, it must go quickly. But if it's large and bulky, and it's taking up space, a lot of space, then space is money. Warehousing is money. Insurance and security and floor space, it's all expensive. So the idea is to try and get rid of the items in the market, through the market, as quickly as possible. But if all the competitors are trying to do it, again, price will be a bit down. Low switching cost. If the consumers can switch between one product and the other very easily, in other words, if there's a very small degree of differentiation and if it's cheap to switch between one and the other, then rivalry will be intense. The companies need to try and keep the consumers, keep the existing ones and get new ones. It must win over buyers who are currently going to rivals, as well as keeping the existing ones. So if the switching costs are low, then it's very difficult to do that. It's very difficult to keep the consumers. The consumers really don't mind who they buy from, perhaps. It's a function of branding, it's a function of loyalty, it's a function of a lot of things, but there certainly is an issue with low switching costs. Low levels of product differentiation. As I said earlier, differentiation can lead to effective branding. Differentiation means that you can identify the product with the producer. If there's no differentiation between the products, you can't tell really which producer is making it. You have to look at the label to try and find out who produced it. Now, if that's the case, if you have to look at the label, there's no differentiation. It doesn't matter which one you buy. But if the product is differentiated, and if you go out to buy the product and it looks different and it feels different and it acts differently and there are different conditions and so on, and then it becomes different in the consumer's mind, in your mind, and perhaps the consumer or you or me or whoever wants to buy it will think this product is worthy of purchase. This is the one we want. Now, differentiation, as I said earlier, can be of two types. It can be physical, looking at it, looking at the product. It looks different, it feels different, it has a different texture, a different design, a different color, different components, different functionality. So it could be physical, or the second way it can be differentiated is psychologically. It can be differentiated in the mind. We may imagine it to be different because a certain company, in our minds, a certain company portrays a certain image. I suppose the best example of this would be designer clothing. If you buy a t-shirt made by a top designer, it'll cost more than a t-shirt made by whoever, nobody, by somebody across the road. Still a t-shirt. The stitching might be different, and it might be better by the designer, and the fabric might be better. Still a t-shirt, but in your mind it's a lot different. However, maybe I've got that wrong, I don't know, but still a t-shirt to me anyway. Let's think. High exit barriers. Well, as I said earlier, companies may get locked into an industry. They can't get out because they've got high costs, capital costs or premises or so on. In this case, to fight vigorously to survive. So those are some of the points that lead to rivalry. And that's one of the key functions, one of the key forces, I should say, of Porter's 5 forces. Well worth deeper consideration, this particular one. Okay, thank you.